Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's ready to build some unicorns today outside of the valley. So welcome, everyone. The term unicorn was meant that it's a statistically rare creature. It's a myth. But there are about 1,500, about 1,400 actually now in 2024, unicorns all around the world. There are about 660 in the Valley, of course. There are over 300 in China. There are 120 plus in India, 120 plus across all of Europe, 60 plus here in the Middle East. So clearly, there are a lot of unicorns out of the Valley, and some of those creators are right here. Juan and Gracy have built unicorns out of the Valley, and Jill is helping them get there. So let's get started. Juan, let me start with you. So what are the things that have changed now in today's environment that are enabling the creation of unicorns outside of the Valley?
Perfect. Great question. So there are, I think, two main parts that have changed completely. One of them is access to funding. A couple of years ago, it was hard to be able to get venture capital investment outside of the US or even outside of the Valley. And even a little bit before COVID, you had access to these funds, but you had to travel to San Francisco and Silicon Valley to have meetings and to do fundraising. This has changed, and like my last round in the new company, we did everything through Zoom. So you're actually able to get US venture capital, European venture capital interest, and you can do rounds online. And then secondly is talent. The talent that you need to start tech companies was really scarce. In Colombia, you really didn't have software developers. Most of the people in Rappi, we had to train in-house. And this, as companies grow and companies as Rappi basically incubate new companies, you get access to this talent that before was only available in the Valley.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up pretty well, Gracie. So let me move on to the next point. Are there some kind of sectors or industries that are actually better off and they have a competitive advantage if they're not in the Valley?
If they're not in the Valley. So before this, I was in another panel this morning talking about digital currency, digital economy. I'm from Bitget, by the way. So we are a global company that we serve about 25 million users around the world. And in terms of my industry, which is cryptocurrency and blockchain, actually right now we see a big shift from the United States to other parts of the world.
Yeah.
For example, to Europe or to some countries or areas in Asia, including Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, Qatar, where there are clearer framework in terms of regulation and compliance in cryptocurrency. While in the US, SEC, CFTC, all these regulatory institutions have been a little bit vague. And you probably have heard some other exchanges were fined like multi-billion of USD because they serve the US customer. So, I mean, in our industry, that's a perfect example of some countries shifting away from the United States.
Yeah.
Even if they are in the US, not necessarily all the projects are from Silicon Valley. We see lots of great projects in New York or the so-called the Northeast ecosystem, including Boston, where Harvard, MIT, lots of great institutions are based. And then also in Miami, in Austin, in Texas, other parts of the United States. So there were like a very big diversity in terms of the location.
So clearly, policy and regulation has a part to play, and Jill, that's where you come in. It's your government that started Unicorn Factory that you're heading now. So tell us a little bit about the role that accelerators such as yours can play.
So when we look at governments and ecosystems, I think that at the end of the day, innovation is a key driver for the future. So we see different regions, Europe, Middle East, Asia, really trying to compete at a global level with the United States, which obviously historically has always been on the forefront of driving the unicorns. But over the past few years, as you said, that really has been shifting. And this has also been supported by a clear strategy from the governments to be able to groom and to grow innovation in their regions. Europe has been investing quite significantly over the past 10 years, supporting different programs in different verticals like health tech, AI, and so on and so forth. The Middle East now, for the last 5-6 years, has also really picking up a lot this investment. And Asia, I think, has been always been very relevant. So governments started supporting players like us, like unicorn accelerators or incubators, in order to provide the resources and the tools for founders to be able to grow their startups without requiring to move to the US. And that is what now we are seeing more and more. So they are able to stay locally or stay in the region, grow globally, and somehow having a presence in the US is always keeps being quite important, but allows these unicorns to start getting founded across the world.
Okay, so Gracie, if I were to come back to you and ask you what have been some of the unique factors that have actually helped you scale your company to a unicorn, and to do with the region that you're in.
With the region. So just for everyone's information, I have built 3 companies in the past 10 years. The first company I did was in 2015, and that's a fintech firm based in China, in Beijing and Tianjin. So I think that's a great success because we were chatting about this. So last year, this company's GMV, which is like the yearly volume, was about 80 billion USD, and that's about 500 billion renminbi, which is Chinese yuan. And the second firm I did was a VR company, and that was a failure. And the third firm that I did is this current company that I'm working for, Bitget. So we're a crypto exchange. I would say it's a relative success. We don't know the end game yet, but since it's growing pretty well, we've been working with.
How did the region help?
Yeah. So back to your question, I think. From my past experience, one thing that I think is really important is about how big the market is.
Yeah.
So we are talking about, for example, my first firm. The reason that I think it can be a success was largely because we really got a very good taxation scheme from the government, and also we are serving a big market. So in China, there is also lots of influencers like TikTok. Actually, TikTok is a subsidiary of this Chinese firm called ByteDance. So for my first company, right now we are serving about 80% of the top 100 MCNs, which is the agents for those TikTokers.
Right.
So that's what I mean, like a big market that you are really looking into.
Great.
And I think in certain regions like China, the US, and maybe Latin America that Juan is working on, we have that kind of capacity where you can build a big market.
So the size of the market obviously helps. The other thing is the talent, Juan. So there was a time where you would see coders flying to Silicon Valley, learning programming, and coming back. So have you had a challenge in hiring the right talent when you were starting out?
Yeah, for sure. And before we move to that, I think something that it was a challenge for us in Latin America, we started a company in Colombia, we had to expand to Mexico. And in order to get to an addressable market that was the same as China, the US, we had to open 9 different countries. So it was a lot of complexity on basically establishing companies, establishing new languages, because even though we all speak Spanish in Latin America and Portuguese in Brazil, even the Spanish was different. So that was a challenge when we met with investors. They were like, okay, but Colombia is actually really small. Are you actually going to become a unicorn? And we proved them that through basically opening more countries, we're able to build a unicorn. Around talent, at the beginning, it was really hard to find the right people with the right skills. And one of the biggest things that is completely different from Silicon Valley is the mindset of an entrepreneur. Before Rappi in Colombia, you didn't know what a startup was. So people looked after going to a big company, climb the corporate ladder, get really good compensation. And when we talked to people, we were like, look, you're going to work 12 to 16 hours per day. You're going to make 20% from what you're making right now. You're going to work weekends. And there is an 80% chance that in a couple months, you're not going to have a job. Are you willing to come? And most people are like, no, this is such a bad idea. But there were some people that say yes, and they got equity in the company, and today they're extremely happy, and they know that they made that good decision. So today, when you tell people, like, okay, you're going to join the company, you're going to work a lot, you're going to make less money, but you have the opportunity to actually create wealth and to be part in something that is going to change the world. People have seen the success of Rappi, have seen the success of other startups, and they're more willing. So now when you talk to people going out of university, now people will say, yeah, I want to work for a startup. And I have people all the time like, hey, I really want to work with you. I really want to work with Rappi. How can I get in? This is something that before we were successful, it was extremely hard to convince people. In Silicon Valley, everyone wanted to work for a startup. It was kind of the only way. Like, some people wanted to work for Google or Facebook or Apple, but the majority were looking to actually start a new company. So it's a completely change of mindset that have led to a change in having more talent and people joining.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? So, Jill, here's where I want to bring you in again. Are there certain strategies that startup founders can look at when it comes to getting the capital? Perhaps even the capital is coming in from the valley, but are there specific strategies that startups that want to scale up quickly can use to attract investment?
So I'll just, before touch a bit about the talent, I think one of the reasons why other regions really started having more unicorns was exactly the talent. And I give you the specific example of Portugal and Lisbon. So we are a small country, we have 10 million inhabitants, but is the highest highest number of engineers graduates in Europe in terms of per capita. And that alone has been able to attract a lot of tech companies over the last few years. So the talent actually attracts innovation. And with these startups, and as Juan said, talent also wants to start new businesses. And that's why we start seeing where there is talent, innovation to flourish. Talking about the funding. So traditionally, again, the US has always been with the largest VCs in the world, but that has also changed, or it's changing across the time. So in Europe, there are a number of very large VCs, and the VCs is an interesting industry because although they compete with each other, they also collaborate together when they go funding. So at the end of the day, there's this network that if one VC goes, there's immediately a few other VCs that will connect. Plus, as we spoke in the previous question, the government funds. And here again, we see governments taking a step on also being active VCs as well in the market with different instruments. And we see that in Europe with the European Union, we see that with local governments, we see this in the Middle East, in Asia, because at the end of the day, they understand if there is funding, there's an opportunity for the scale up to stay in the country and to grow and scale from there.
Yeah, and a lot of founders want to expand out of the original markets that they started in. I think you've done that as well. What were the biggest challenges that you faced then, and perhaps a mistake or two that you made?
For us, we are a crypto exchange, and each region are very different. So one challenge we had was about localization our products. So, for example, each country, each region, they have their own languages, they have their own cultures as well. When we are serving, for example, the Middle East market, we realize that there are certain products that they don't want. For example, anything with leverage, like it's culturally or religionally not very favored. So we need to make lots of localization, things like this. Another challenge I had was about managing this 1,500 company, people of company. There's a mosquito. In terms of they speak different languages, they are on different time zones. I think that's also a bit challenging, like how to manage such a big firm.
So large teams, also localization. I think you were also referring, you had a very interesting anecdote to share with us.
Yeah, and I have kind of like two different challenges. Like when we started Rappi, as we expanded to different countries, you had the regulatory challenges. You had to operate, you have to start a new company in each country. And one of the biggest issues was actually payments and receiving payments around the world. And that challenge of like connecting to 15 different payment processors, payment methods, led me to start my second company, which is and it was trying to solve that issue. Companies, we think we live in a global world, but the reality is that payments extremely fragmented. You have different payment methods, you have different payment processors. So what Juno does is actually solve that issue, and we enable through one integration to connect companies to more than 300 different payment methods and payment processors. And like you know, there are other companies and there are other startups that have solved different issues. One of the issues that we had in Rappi was that we had to start a company to hire people in that country. Today with Juno, we basically have a team around the world in more than 15 countries, and we use Deal to be able to hire them and to pay them. So it is much easier today to start a global company or a company that operates around the world, thanks to companies like like Deal and others that have actually, using tech, have actually enabled or reduced the friction of things that a couple of years ago was completely impossible.
Right, so we have to wrap up soon. I have about 2-3 questions and I'd like all of you to answer them. So starting with you, Jill, the biggest challenge that founders are facing in scaling up to become a unicorn?
So, I'll give two different answers. One is, in terms of outside US, it's still the legislation. I think that US has been able to create a very investor and founder-friendly legislation, which allows companies to be very flexible and agile in US. So one challenge is that founders outside US have is how to deal with the local legislations and how governments can help. Okay. The second point is, I think, it's with this growing globally. So when the founding team is working on a product and are finding the product market fit, and they are shifting towards expanding globally, the skills change significantly. And that's how can they really acquire those skills in order not to waste funds and not to waste time.
Got it. One.
Focus on solving a real problem. I think entrepreneurs, they hear AI and they hear all these words and they're trying to use the technology without really solving a problem. I think the biggest advice is to focus on solving a real problem and stop listening to the noise from all the new trends, because at the end, you build a company that works and you get funding when you have actually built technology or built a company that solves a real problem and not a company that sounds cool or that uses AI.
Good one.
To build on Juan's point, I think look at numbers. So how do you know that you are solving a real problem, right? You're building something that people need. If there are growth in users, in your DAU, in your volume, then you know you are solving a real problem. So look at the numbers.
Okay, last question, guys. Are the days of aspiring to be a unicorn in the Valley over?
Sorry?
Are the days of aspiring to be a unicorn in the Valley over?
Are the days over to be? No, I don't think so. I think still lots of people want to go to, for example, Stanford, Berkeley, and stay in that region, grow something. I do have lots of friends graduating from those two top schools. By the way, I came from the north side because I graduated from MIT. So MIT, Harvard, that's another competitive region. But I still think lots of people are in Valley, and there's great spirit.
I think it's completely over. I think the weather is nicer in Bogota, Colombia, compared to San Francisco, and I think those challenges that people used to face and that basically force them to move to the Silicon Valley are over, and you can start a company and a unicorn anywhere in the world.
Okay, Jill, we're out of time, so one line.
So I do think that now you can really grow a unicorn anywhere, in the Valley, but also outside the Valley.
Okay, you leave us with a lot of hope. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.